Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, the 30th meeting of the 53rd session of the Human Rights Council is now open. Distinguished participants, I declare open agenda item 7, entitled Human Rights Situation in Palestine and Other Occupied Arab Territories. We will now proceed with the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967. The list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. I now give the floor to Ms. Francesca Albanese to present her report. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, delegates, members of civil society, and national human rights institutions. I'm honored to present my first report as Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967 to the Human Rights Council. Allow me to express my gratitude to the distinguished members of the Council for bestowing upon me this mandate that I undertake with unwavering dedication, rigor, and impartiality. I chose to focus this report on arbitrary deprivation of liberty early in my tenure because of the gravity of this phenomenon in the occupied Palestinian territory. Since 1967, Israel has detained approximately 1 million Palestinians in the occupied territory, including tens of thousands of children. Currently, there are 5,000 Palestinians in Israeli prisons, including 160 children, and 1,100 of them are detained without charge or trial. Let me be clear from the outset. I do not condone any acts of violence that the Palestinians might have committed or might commit while living under an unlawful occupation or in the pursuit to end it. However, we must acknowledge that most Palestinians have been convicted through a series of violations of international law, such as discrimination, persecution, and breaches of due process, and for ordinary acts of life in the exercise of legitimate rights. I found that widespread and systemic arbitrary deprivation of liberty of Palestinians is a structural component of the regime that Israel has imposed upon them. And let's look closer at this structure. The enforcement of deprivation of liberty of Palestinians in the occupied territory rests in the hand of the Israeli military, which writes, enforces and reviews martial laws that only applied to Palestinians. Israeli domestic laws, meanwhile, applies to Israeli settlers illegally residing therein. This dual legal system is the pillar of Israel's apartheid regime. The presence of the Palestinian Authority does not change this reality, nor does it alter Israel's obligation under international law. An intricate web of military orders, about 2,500 of them, an emergency regulation dating back to the British Mandate era, dictate offences enforced at the discretion of the Israeli military. I would like you to consider just some of the legal grounds that lead to Palestinians' arrest and detention. Political gatherings of more than 10 people, including processions or vigils, without a permit by the army, are criminalized with 10 years imprisonment. Entering military-declared restricted areas in the West Bank and East Jerusalem is subject to 7 to 10 years imprisonment. Having contacts with or possessing materials related to hostile organization is punishable with 10 years imprisonment. And let me be clear, all major Palestinian organizations, from political parties to charities and human rights organizations, are considered hostile. Membership in any group where other members commit specific offences is punishable by life imprisonment. This draconian legal regime, which is also vaguely drafted and confusing across military orders that overlap and contradict each other, lays the foundation of a coercive environment whereby Palestinians are constantly at risk of being imprisoned, often by carrying out the simple acts of life, from farming, fishing, going to school, but also opposing the occupation. The broad base to incarcerate Palestinians notwithstanding, Palestinians are routinely arrested and detained without charge or trial, often based on secret evidence and for an indefinite period of time, leaving them in a limbo of uncertainty. Administrative detention has become a tool to persecute Palestinians under occupation. Military courts, staffed by entirely military personnel, are the primary and often the only judicial avenue accessible to Palestinians. And in military courts, where rights to defense is simply not enforceable, Palestinians are presumed guilty, registering a steeply high conviction rate of 99% and forcing most of them to resort to plea bargain, confessing crimes that they have not committed. The very common unlawful deportation outside the occupied Palestinian territory, because 80% of Palestinian prisoners are detained against international law in Israel, triggers a domino effect of violations ranging from confinement in places where legal defense, legal counsel and families cannot access the detainee or the prisoners. While in Israeli custody, Palestinians are subject to all sorts of physical and psychological abuses, also often to illicit confessions. And some of these treatments might amount to torture and other cruel, inhumane and degrading treatment. Children liable to imprisonment since 12 years of age are treated as inhumanely and lawlessly as adults, forced to spend an average of 12.5 days in solitary confinement, and most of the detention without contact with families or lawyers. The prison experience leaves an indelible traumatic mark on them, breaking the spirit of future generations. Imprisonment trespasses Palestinian life. It is common practice for the Israeli forces to detain the bodies of Palestinians deceased in custody or killed during Israeli armed attacks. Most arrests take place within 1 kilometer from the 270 colonies that Israel has built for 750,000 Israelis in the occupied Palestinian territory, against one of the most foundational norms of international humanitarian law, and often during raids and incursions, often at the dead of night, to instill fear and to make sure, to quote Israeli soldiers, to make sure that their presence is felt. This is why I say it is the security of Israel's systematic appropriation of Palestinian land and dispossession of the Palestinian people that the longest occupation of modern history is meant to defend, not the security of Israel as a member of the family of the United Nations, which remains sacrosanct. The occupying power frames the Palestinians as a collective threat, ultimately de-civilianizing them, namely eroding their status as protected person under international law. On top of it, the individual and mass deprivation of liberty dovetails with a mass entrapment that captivates the Palestinians as a people in the occupied territory through physical, bureaucratic and digital confinement techniques, transforming the occupied Palestinian territory as a whole into a constantly surveilled open-air prison. Walls, checkpoints, alternative roads, segregated roads which fragment the territory into something that evokes the carceral archipelago of Foucauldian memory. Bureaucratic barriers consisting of permits and prohibitions that regulate every instance of Palestinian life, from visiting family, deciding to travel abroad, choosing residence and cultivating, farming their land. Surveillance technologies that follow the Palestinians everywhere they are. This is what the Palestinians live under. This further restricts the Palestinians spatially and psychologically, creating a pervasive system of discipline, control and punishment to anyone who objects or who opposes this system. This large-scale carcerality is an essential feature of settler colonial regimes, which in history have crushed native populations while incrementally seizing their land. In this context, Palestinian authorities operate in captivity under Israel's omnipresent control and are not a state apparatus geared to defend or protect the Palestinians, as exemplified by the recent attacks by the Israeli army or heavily armed settlers in Nablus, Jenin, Jericho, Hawara, Masaferiata, Turmusaya, Urif, Safa, and the Gaza Strip. Therefore, invoking both parties to calm down is misleading. Israel's unlawful carceral practices are tantamount to international crimes, as I documented in my report, which warrant an urgent investigation by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. All the more as these offences appear to be part of a plan to de-Palestinianize the territory. This threatens the existence of the Palestinians as a people, as a national cohesive group. It is critical that the international community recognizes the illegality of Israel's occupation, naturally leading to apartheid. This cannot be rectified, this cannot be made more humane by merely addressing some of its most severe consequences. It is to be brought to an end and restore the rule of law and justice. And I ask you, I urge you to follow up on this recommendation in the interest of both the Palestinians and the Israelis. Thank you.
Thank you. According to our practice, we will start by hearing from the delegations of the countries concerned. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Israel. You have 5 minutes. I note that the delegation of Israel is not present in the room. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine. You have 5 minutes.